Hey Reluctant Preppers, this is showing you just how easy it is to purchase silver without paying any premium over spot price. You just go to sdbullion.com/RP, scroll down and enter the special code to get silver without any premium, and they'll mail it to your mailbox, discreetly packaged. Inside you'll find a beautiful 10-ounce bar of fine silver, and you are able to purchase that and have it and add it to your stack and your collection without paying any premium. And you're supporting Reluctant Preppers along the way. Thanks.
As a responsible person with growing concerns for your privacy and personal liberty, you want to know where we're headed and what you can do about it. We ask the experts what you need to do to take prudent and responsible action to safeguard your family's wealth and well-being, and what basic first steps will help you to be aware and prepared. ReluctantPreppers.com.
Welcome back, Reluctant Preppers. We're delighted to have this returning guest. Mike Rivero, founder of WhatReallyHappened.com, is here with us again on Reluctant Preppers. He's been an outspoken advocate for digging a little deeper, or a lot deeper in some cases, than what we're finding out on the mainstream media to find out what's really going on in many situations. Mike, we had you on here just before the Trump election, actually, and talking about Obama's scorecard for preppers, at the legacy of the 8 years of the Obama administration, and whether it left us better off or worse off from an individual risk perspective. Tonight is election night around the U.S., and it's been 1 year since the unexpected, by most, election of Donald Trump, and we're here to have you ask if you could give us your directional indication on what you think is Trump's scorecard for preppers and people wanting risk reduction and preparedness and financial security and doing the right thing for their families. So welcome back to Reluctant Preppers.
Well, thank you for having me. And at this point, even though I was supporting Trump, or to be more accurate, I was opposed to Hillary Clinton, he has been a bit of a disappointment on several areas, including both the economy and the rush to more wars, both of which are going to have a significant impact on potentially on all of our lives here. And I would say that, if anything, Donald Trump's score for preppers is probably as bad as Obama's, and it may even be getting worse. The economy is clearly spiraling out of control, and the GOP Congress seems very intent on giving more gifts to Wall Street bankers. The new GOP tax plan basically has left in a lot of tax loopholes, some of which Donald Trump actually claimed were wrong and bad for the country during his campaign, but they remain untouched. And so I think there's never a time when you shouldn't be prepping. That's a given. But I think right now people just need to be much more aware that there could be an economic upset in the very near future. We always tell our audience and our readers that they should have no more in the bank than they need to cover their immediate obligations, and the rest should be under their own control at home, under the mattress, buried in a mayonnaise jar out by the pineapple plantation, whatever. And some of it should be physical cash, and some of it should be silver and gold. We know that in response to people trying to pull out of some of these bank accounts and equities markets, there's a big push on Wall Street for a cashless society. That seems to be fizzling. People don't like the idea. They want the idea that the money they worked for, that they can hold it in their hand as some icon of value. And of course, India was used as a test bed for the cashless society, and it really delivered a tremendous amount of harm to their economy. So I think they're pulling back from that. But again, if it's not in your hand, it's not under your control. And anything that's in the computers at the bank or at the stock brokerage, it can be grabbed either by the bank or even by the government in the event of a declared emergency. So the only way to really be prepared to weather the storm is to delink as much as possible from these systems that we're encouraged to be dependent on. And just, again, have it in your own home. As far as the war issue, the reality is that it looks like the U.S. is getting ready to go into North Korea. Saudi Arabia, acting as a proxy for the United States, looks to be aiming at both Lebanon and Iran. And a lot of people are saying that we may be in World War III for real by the time Christmas gets here. It's moving that rapidly. And the reason is very simple. If the economy collapses and the U.S. government doesn't have somebody to blame it on, then the American people are going to blame Wall Street and Washington, D.C. for the economic predation we've spent our lives living underneath. And so, as they've done before in history, when the economy gets to this kind of a crisis, they get into a world war to, if not fix the problem, at least distract from it while they try and figure a way out. Crash of 1907, World War I. Crash of 1929, World War II. Crash of 2008. And here we are on the brink of a global war, which I think the U.S. is probably going to lose, even if it goes nuclear. And if it goes nuclear, we're all going to lose. So on top of the other preparations you're making for the economy, storable food, water, medicine, and so forth, you might want to look at where you live in terms of a possible nuclear strike. And if you are downwind of such a target, you might want to think about getting some potassium iodate pills, which are designed to help the body flush out radiation acquired from fallout. And if you've got the resources, you might want to look at a bomb shelter. I remember those were all the rage in the 1950s when I was a kid. Everybody had bomb shelters, and they were all set up, and they were never used, and which is why most of them are now wine cellars or simple storage.
You mentioned a whole bunch of things in a very rapid succession there. I wonder if we could take a little closer look at a couple of them. Could we start off with specific economic risks, how we compare now to a year ago? We had certain hopes of Donald Trump was going to bring kind of a common sense, sometimes brash expose, and not, he basically pulled back the veil in some places where the parties that had been running the show in Washington really didn't want anybody looking. That's been, I think, for a lot of people, a big disappointment. But can we start by just looking at, for example, leadership of the banking system and those in government who are supposed to be watching over it?
Well, one of the biggest mistakes I think Donald Trump made was he wanted to be magnanimous in victory, and he came into the White House and basically said that a lot of these Obama holdover career politicians could keep their jobs. And I think that was his biggest mistake, because Donald Trump, coming from the world of business, probably assumed that now that he was the boss and effectively signing the paychecks, that all those people would now be loyal to him. That is how it works pretty much in business. It's not how it works in Washington, D.C. politics. And so Donald Trump went into the White House promising to drain the swamp, and instead he started hiring the alligators and the water moccasins into key staff positions. And whether it's by threats or simply keeping him surrounded by false information, it does appear that the existing power structures in Washington, D.C. have Donald Trump under their control. And so even though we got an outsider elected over tremendous election fraud last year, the course of the nation remains the same: the plundering of ordinary people by the money junkies and endless wars of conquest. And it seems, if anything, that the process is now accelerating.
Next topic, still in the section of economic risks, is the banking system. We know that the 2008 collapse, we were told that during the peak of that crisis, that those who were in the positions of privilege and power to know what was really going on said, some of them after the fact, sometimes years after the fact, that we were within hours of a complete meltdown of the global banking system had they not taken some of the emergency measures that they did at the time. Do you, from what you know and the people that you've talked to, believe that there's evidence that our banking system is any better off or much worse off than we were in 2008, or specifically, has anything changed since Donald Trump took office a year ago as far as the health of the... Unfortunately, very little has actually changed. Trump seems to be going along with the agenda of reducing regulation on Wall Street even more than has already been the case. And the problem with what happened in 2008 is the people who caused the problem never paid for it. You talk about the heroic measures that were done to keep the banking system from collapsing, basically amounted to taking all of that huge debt and dumping it on the American people, who had nothing to do with the meltdown in the beginning. And as long as you do that, where you protect the people who engage in these massive frauds from the consequences of their actions, they're going to go out and commit more fraud. Now, back in 2008, it was subprime home loans and mortgage bundling. Now we've got subprime auto loans. We've got bundling of all kinds of things, from student loan obligations to security contracts are being bundled.
And they haven't learned anything. They're out there playing these games because they'll make a lot of money very quickly in the beginning, and then the people who start it all get out in a timely manner. And when it all falls apart, the damage falls again back on the ordinary American taxpayer.
How about the national debt? We were told that during the Obama administration, he doubled basically the national debt and combined as much national debt under his watch as all the previous presidents combined. What about during the Trump presidency? What do you think the trajectory is? What's your report card for Trump on managing the national debt or healing it?
He's not healing it. He's not really managing it. The debt is still spiraling out of control. And we're starting to find out that part of the problem is that Washington, D.C., and in particular the Pentagon, has become basically a money black hole where, I mean, as far back as 9/11, or the day before 9/11 happened, we found out that the Pentagon has just been misplacing trillions and trillions of dollars. And it's something up to like $8 trillion right now. And Elizabeth Warren is out there saying that as far as she can tell, there has been something like $20 trillion that has vanished from the federal budget, and nobody seems to know where it went. And so it's a combination of just this idea that we can keep on borrowing money and kicking the debt can down the road. We don't have to worry about it. And a high degree of recklessness as to where the money is going. But the problem is it's going somewhere. And the more you print up to try and cover those losses or cover the skyrocketing debt, the more you're damaging the value of the dollar. This, in turn, is what is driving other nations to abandon the dollar for global trade and turn to more reliable currencies like the ruble and the yuan. This, in turn, has brought the United States to a position of needing to declare war on other countries to drag them back to using the U.S. dollar, drag us all back to Bretton Woods. So it's this vicious, self-sustaining cycle that is leading us to a global disaster.
How about, you mentioned the U.S. dollar, how about the stock markets? We keep getting nightly news reports of the record after record after record being set by the Dow and other major averages. Are we truly better off from an asset and equity value standpoint now than we were when Donald Trump took office a year ago?
Absolutely not. And the fact of the matter is that if you were to retrace that Dow, taking inflation into account, you'd find out it's not actually soaring all that high. But the problem is that, like the unemployment numbers and like pretty much everything else coming out of the government these days, the market is being rigged. They're pouring money onto Wall Street to just buy up stocks and drive their prices up in order to use that soaring Dow as a political banner. And this actually got started back during the Clinton years with his plunge protection team. And the idea was that anytime the market looked like it was going to go down, they would basically go on in with a bunch of ultra low cost money or virtually zero cost money, so Wall Street could start buying stocks and drive the numbers up again. And then Bill Clinton could wave it and say, it's the economy, stupid. We're doing really good. Look at the stock market. And a lot of people, unfortunately, fell for it. And what they were doing was dishonest. If private citizens did what Clinton was doing, they would go to jail for stock manipulation, but Clinton got away with it, made it look like the stock market was soaring. But the problem is when you're using market rigging, when you're using supply and demand and money to drive the price of the stock up, it doesn't necessarily drag the value of the stock up with it. And you get into a situation of overvaluation. And this out-of-control manipulation of the market has brought us to a point where a lot of experts are saying the overvaluation is now the problem. These sky-high numbers on the Dow are not a good thing. They're actually an indicator of how far the market is going to fall when there finally is a correction. And right now, our stock market is more overvalued than it was just prior to the crash of 1929. And it should be seen as a dangerous warning signal because the value of the stocks isn't there to support those prices. And that means that the first time that there's a major sell-off of stocks, people wanting to get on out, those first few people getting out, they'll get their money back. And then the stocks are going to collapse down to whatever level their actual value will support, and everybody else is going to be left with a very impressive-looking number on their last brokerage report, and that's all it's going to be, a very impressive-looking number.
How about employment? We heard lots of criticism during previous generations, previous presidencies, that there would have been this mass exodus of manufacturing and other industrial and other jobs from the U.S., for example, over to lower cost nations. And Ross Perot was complaining about that, decades ago, and then Trump was talking about it during his campaign, that we've got to quit being stupid about giving away our jobs and our work. And a lot of criticism came during Obama that we had basically, whenever he claimed we had jobs, people were saying, yeah, but they're not full-time jobs anymore. Employers, in order to avoid and evade having to pay Obamacare, for example, would try to cut down to having less than 50 employees or make sure people don't work more than 30 hours a week so they wouldn't have to get full-time benefits, et cetera. So now Trump was going to come in and clean that up for the middle class. So what is the state of employment now compared to a year ago, and what direction are we seeing it go under the Trump administration?
Well, it's not very good here. Now, Trump apparently is preparing an executive order to end the mandate for Obamacare, and that will probably allow some employers to bring back full-time jobs. But the reality is that the overwhelming majority of jobs added this year, and by the way, when they say we've added so many jobs this year, they don't mention how many jobs were lost in the same period of time. But the vast majority of the jobs that were added since Trump took office turn out to be temp jobs, where they'll work a couple of weeks and then they'll go home again, and then they'll go on out and get another temp job, which is counted as another whole new job, rather than the same person hopping from place to place to place. There's a huge amount of deception in these numbers. I think they came on out and said that our unemployment number is now down to 4-point-something%, and that is absurd, because right now we have almost 100 million Americans willing and able to work who have not been able to find jobs for months, if not years. And they're simply not counted among the unemployed. The unemployed figure is just those people who lost their jobs in the last couple of weeks. And it's just another way of cooking the books to make numbers that make the government look really good. And of course, all of these illegal immigrants pouring on in, who are taking low-paying jobs being paid under the table. They're not paying any taxes. They're taking jobs away from the American people. Same thing with the refugees that are being brought in from Africa and the Middle East, and they're being brought in and given financial assistance. They're being treated better by the U.S. government than the American people are. And they're, of course, going on out and acquiring jobs as well. And I don't think that we should have any tolerance for illegal immigration, or for that matter, refugees, while Americans are going without jobs. And that's just the way I feel about that.
What about government corruption? There had been quite a bit of talk during the Obama administration, scandal after scandal after scandal. I won't go through them all here. People certainly have heard about a lot of them. More recently, we've heard about selling of favors by the State Department and uranium sales and that sort of thing. But under the watch of the Trump administration for this next year, does it appear that we're heading in the right direction with less government corruption, or is it business as usual in Washington?
Well, I think at the moment it appears to be business as usual in Washington, but there is an optimistic note here, and that is because all of these scandals are coming on out. You've got Donna Brazile came on out basically confirming that the Democratic National Committee stole the nomination from Bernie Sanders to give to Hillary Clinton, and that has to be enraging every voter in America, not just the Democrats, but Republicans, who are basically getting the message that going to an election is just a theater piece. It's a show. And your vote doesn't really matter because the candidates and the officials are being decided by the party apparatus. Now, clearly, we saw how the GOP was trying to get Trump out because he was an outsider last year. We saw how the DNC did succeed in getting Bernie Sanders out because he was considered an outsider. But in the end, despite all the election fraud that was going on, we, the American people, voted Donald Trump in, and that has basically got a lot of people very scared. Hillary is very much on the decline. And so a lot of people are starting to talk about what's really been going on with the Clintons and the narcocracy over the last 30 years. And so I think, official Washington is trying to hold back the flood. We have our second attorney general in a row that's refusing to prosecute or investigate the Clintons. We have our second FBI director in a row who's clearly trying to protect the Clintons. And it's not just the Clintons. It's obviously that narcocracy behind them, the Bush family, the CIA, going all the way back to Vietnam, running drugs into this country to fund covert operations and selling these drugs to our kids. And that is a real dark scandal that I think could bring down the entire federal government. And that is the hammer the Clintons have held over the rest of the government ever since the Iran-Contra days in Arkansas. You know, if I go down, you'll all go down, because we'll blow the whistle on the fact that the biggest drug smuggler in the country is the Central Intelligence Agency, and they are the reason so many of our nation's children have become hooked on these highly dangerous, addictive drugs.
Geopolitical risks. You mentioned hotspots all over the world, and it seems that there's a drum beating constantly now, and it may be coming to a head soon. Can you give us your personal view from those people that you've had on, and you've talked to a lot of people about whether we're any better off or are we worse off now than we were a year ago in terms of geopolitical risks?
Well, we're still on the path to a world war that we were on a year ago. And that is my greatest disappointment in Donald Trump, because he campaigned on the promise of pulling back from all these foreign interventions. And instead, he's surrounded himself by all these military people who absolutely love war. He's got a Congress that absolutely loves war because they don't have to fight it. Their children don't have to die in it. They don't have to pay for it. And we are seeing a rapid escalation of war. And as I said earlier in the interview, the reason is the government needs a real global war before the economy collapses, so they've got something to blame it on. And that's why we're seeing this rush where already the propaganda is ramping up for an attack into North Korea. And the Pentagon is saying it will take a full-on ground invasion to get all the nuclear weapons and the missiles, and the body count from that will be horrendous. And if you doubt me, go back and read the history of the start of the Korean War, half a century ago, and you will see we're talking about like a third of the population of North Korea was killed off, which is why they don't want the U.S. to come on in, which is why they've been building nuclear weapons and missiles as a deterrent. Then you have Saudi Arabia. It looks like Crown Prince bin Salman is consolidating his power, and it looks like he is working together with Israel and the United States, ready to start a war into Lebanon and possibly Iran as well. And the war on Lebanon appears to be their plan B for having gotten kicked out of Syria, because Syria is back pretty much in the hands of the Syrian government. And so now they're going to go into Lebanon. They're not ready to quit this idea of conquering the entire Middle East. But at some point, we're going to wind up in a full-on war, probably against Russia or China. And it's not going to go well, because America's weapons developers have produced a generation of weapons that are hideously expensive, very difficult to use and repair. They're not very effective. And on top of that, we've got these major personnel issues that are starting to surface within the military as well. And probably the Fat Leonard scandal is a good illustration. This is a corruption scandal that is now entangled 60 U.S. Navy admirals in the 7th Fleet. And that's the same fleet that has had these problems with collisions between warships and commercial shipping, because apparently these crews that are being put in charge of these ships don't understand the maritime rules of right-of-way. And they're trying to dart ahead of these large ships. They're misjudging it, and they're ramming into them. And so there is a real problem. This is, by no reasonable expectation, an efficient, effective fighting force despite all the money that's been poured into it. We're in a situation right now where we're spending money on military far in excess of other countries, but it doesn't guarantee victory.
If we could turn our attention briefly to lessons learned recently from the hurricane fusillade that we've seen coming across the Caribbean Sea, especially, for example, the lessons learned in Puerto Rico, where almost all the power in the island was knocked out, and how that affected people who had their funds tied up in ATMs or charge card to the banks, that sort of thing. Just other lessons learned that you see coming out of the hurricane season we've just been through.
Well, it was absolutely an epic disaster. And yeah, it was a big problem. People had their money in the banks. They had them in the ATM machines. The whole system went down. The entire island was without power. Much of it still is. And Puerto Rico is saying that if the United States, which Puerto Rico is a possession of the United States, so there's some responsibility there, if they don't start sending down some serious money to rebuild, Puerto Rico is just going to tell their Puerto Rican citizens, move to Florida and turn it into a democratic state.
So
they actually issued that threat here.
What lessons do you take? I mean, you're an island dweller. You live
Yes.
in Hawaii, so different weather patterns in that part of the world. But
no, we get hurricanes here too. We even get an occasional tornado. But again, when the hurricane is on the way, and that's the advantage you have with a hurricane, you know it's coming. You go to the bank, you get your money out. Yeah, you set yourself up to be totally self-sufficient, because you know the infrastructure around you is probably going to collapse. The power's going to go out, the water's going to go out, the sewage may not work correctly, and you have to be ready to just deal with that yourself. Now, unfortunately, the standard of living in Puerto Rico does not allow those people to indulge in prepping, and that was the reason so many of them really got caught up in this tragedy. It would have been advisable for them to go to the bank and pull out actual cash. But many of them did not do so. And when those ATMs went down, that was it. There were people, they had money, but they couldn't take it to the store. They couldn't go to the store and use their ATM card to purchase anything. And that's always the weakness of these card-based systems. And you don't need a storm to do with that. My wife and I were down at the Safeway here a couple of weeks ago, and we're in line with our groceries, and everybody in front of us has got their little plastic card out. And then apparently the card system in the store went down. Nobody, they couldn't read a credit card, couldn't read a debit card, couldn't read an EBT card, and everybody was just stuck with carts of groceries that they couldn't take out of the store because they couldn't pay for them. Claire and I, of course, we do everything with cash, and so we were able to get out of there with our groceries and get home. But it's time to really start thinking about breaking free of all these systems that you are encouraged, if not forced, to be dependent on, because dependency is enslavement and control. And you need to start taking that back. You need to run your life like you don't want to be under the control of the bank. You don't want to be under the watchful eye of the government looking into your banking records to see what you're spending your money on. And again, there's never a time where prepping is not going to be needed. But at this point, I would say, if anything, overall, under President Trump, the need to be prepping is probably higher than it was a year ago.
One more question. And that's about these severely disruptive weather events. Certainly it's a hot topic. People talk all about, climate change, global warming, contrails, everything. But do you see from the people that you've been talking with any pattern shift or frequency change in lethal and severe weather events, disruptive weather events in general?
In general, overall, no. We did have that cluster in the Caribbean, and sometimes things will cluster together. But the only pattern we seem to be seeing right now is that winter is settling into the Northern Hemisphere a little earlier and a little harder. And so for people who are living in those areas, your prepping has to include making sure that you have, extra dry fuel for that fireplace if the electric or the gas company stops working. And take cold weather seriously. You can freeze to death, even in the United States of America. And so you might want to pay a little more attention to that to make sure you've got adequate warm clothing and supplies to survive being snowed in a major blizzard.
Mike, are there any other stones left unturned that come to mind when we ask about individual families' risk profile now versus a year ago under the Trump presidency?
Well, obviously, every family's risk profile is going to be unique to them based on, first of all, how many people are in the family, how many pets they have, where they live, the quality of the local infrastructure. There are some people who are living in places where, prepping, for major thunderstorms is going to be about all that there is. Then you have people who live in other areas like we do, where you have to deal with the potential of tsunamis and getting attacked by Russia and China in the coming war. And obviously, our prepping profile is going to be a little more intense.
Well, if people want to find out more of your work at whatreallyhappened.com, there's more than one way that they can do that. Can you give us a quick rundown so people are aware if they want to plug into more of your work?
Well, obviously the website, whatreallyhappened.com, I've been doing it so long, I've actually forgotten how long I've been doing it. I think it's something around 24 years, coming up on a quarter of a century. I've been blogging since before the word was even invented. Then there's also the radio show over at the Republic Broadcasting Network, every Monday through Friday from 3 p.m. to 6 p.m. Central U.S. time. And you can go to republicbroadcasting.org. Or you can go to my website during the broadcast. There are little windows that pop up with the camera view into my studio here in Oahu, or links to the streaming player at RBN.
Excellent. Mike Rivero, he is the founder and host at whatreallyhappened.com. He's a frequent guest here on Reluctant Preppers, and he always gives us a very entertaining and thought-provoking view of of current events and gets us thinking and checking our sources, because he's going to tell us the rest of the story that we are not hearing on the mainstream news. So, Mike, once again, thank you for being here with us on Reluctant Preppers.
Thank you for having me.